scary Halloween stories. Happy Halloween. Jennifer was sitting at the desk in her bedroom, finishing up on her homework. She had an exam the next day and needed to study. As she was searching for one of her school books, she received a text message on her cell phone. She didn't recognize the number, but the text read, "Take a bath and go to bed. It's a school night, Mom." She probably ran out of credit and texted me from someone else's phone, thought Jennifer. She had already been planning to take a nice relaxing bubble bath soon anyways. So she undressed, grabbed a clean towel, and walked into the bathroom. She stopped in her tracks, surprised. The bathtub had already been filled to the brim. That's strange, she thought. I guess Mom filled it in advance. Shrugging her shoulders, Jennifer dropped the towel and climbed into the bath. Her whole body was submerged before she became aware of the burning sensation all over her skin. Within seconds, the burning feeling got worse and worse until she was crying out in agony. She jumped out of the bath, but it was too late. To her horror, she saw the water stain red, blood red. The skin on her arms and legs was beginning to peel off. Then her chest and stomach began to peel. All the skin on her body was coming off. Pieces of her skin fell to the floor and she started screaming in pain. Her blood formed a puddle around her on the bathroom floor. In terrible pain, Jennifer opened the door of the bathroom and hobbled out. She made her way to her bedroom. Every step was agony. She left a bloody trail along the carpet. She picked up her cell phone to call the police, but there was a new text message waiting for her. It read, "Next time, bathe in water." Jennifer heard laughter behind her and turned around to find a tall man dressed in black standing in the doorway. He was holding a jagged knife in one hand and an empty container of sulfuric acid in the other. It was Halloween night in 2004, and a young boy was being picked on by his brother and some older kids from his school. They dared the young boy to go into the graveyard at midnight with a bunch of garlands and place one on each of the gravestones. Not wanting them to think he was a coward, the young boy accepted the challenge. It was a moonless night and the inside of the cemetery was pitch black. The rusty gates of the cemetery opened with a creak and the boy cautiously entered. He looks at his watch. It was midnight, the witching hour. Clutching the garlands tightly, he made his way to the middle of the graveyard. He was shaking with fear, but he tried to steady his nerves. He was afraid that if he returned without completing the task, the older boys would laugh at him. Moving slowly through the cemetery, he got the distinct feeling that someone or something was watching him. Finally, he managed to place each garland on a gravestone, and his task was complete. "Well, that's all of them," he whispered to himself. Just then, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder as a voice hissed, "You forgot one." There were two girls named Emma and Veronica who lived on the same street. It was Halloween night and Emma's parents had gone away for the weekend. She was a little nervous about being on her own in the house overnight, so she invited her friend Veronica over to keep her company. The girls planned to have a sleepover. During the day, they swapped clothes and did each other's hair and nails. In the evening, they ordered a pizza and watched a horror movie. Now and then, a group of kids would ring the doorbell and yell, "Trick or treat!" The two girls had fun handing out Halloween candy. Afterwards, the girls spent a long time chatting and gossiping about the other kids in their school. Before they knew it, it was past midnight. The girls were both very tired, so they decided it was time to go to sleep. Emma got into her own bed, while Veronica had to sleep on the futon on the floor. The room was completely silent, and Emma was gradually drifting off to sleep. Just then, Veronica sat up and began shaking her friend. "Come on, let's go downstairs and get some ice cream, she said loudly. Emma was very sleepy and muttered, I'm not hungry. Well, I am, replied Veronica. Come on, let's go downstairs. Emma turned over in bed. There's no ice cream in the freezer, she moaned drowsily. We ate it all. Then, let's go to the store and buy some, said Veronica. I don't want any, mumbled her friend. You go on your own. No, it's not safe to walk alone at night, Veronica whined. Come on, let's go. Emma lay in bed trying to ignore her. Please, Emma, Veronica started crying. Please, I really want some ice cream. Tears were streaming down her face. Emma was exasperated. She was sick and tired of listening to her friend whine. Oh my God, Veronica. Okay, she shouted. If it's that important to you, then I'll go to the shop with you. Just calm down. The girls quickly got dressed and put on their coats. As soon as they left the house, however, Veronica grabbed her friend's hand and started dragging her to the opposite direction. This isn't the way to the store, said Emma. Shh, hissed Veronica. We're going to the police station. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a man with an axe hiding under your bed. Jonathan ran home as fast as he could, his heart racing in his chest and his eyes focused on the path in front of him. The dead were attacking from everywhere. Cars crashed and buildings exploded all around. The teenage boy looked back once and found an old, battered woman looking at him. Her face was mush on one side, with blood and ripped flesh hanging down. She snarled at him, and as she raised her hands in his direction, a car ran into her by accident. The teen kept running. He needed to get back home. Well, the place he called home for the moment was his grandpa's house. He had came to visit for a 2-week stay, and now it was the only place he knew he would be safe. The boy ran down the street of his neighborhood. He looked to his right and saw a mother being bitten by 3 zombies, and her children were cornered in the garden by 5 dead, hungry zombies. The teen almost stopped in hesitation to go help, but 2 cars wrecked in front of him, causing him to fall back and hit his head on the street. The flames danced in the air as the cars burned, and shouts in the wreckage echoed out into the Halloween night sky. He got up slowly in a daze to find a burning zombie pulling its broken body in his way. Its legs dragged on the pavement as it growled and reached for him. "Get away from me!" he shouted. The teen stood up in a dizzy spell, then almost fainted. He caught his balance and jogged past all the chaos on the street. The teenager reached his grandpa's house, then unlocked the door and locked it as soon as he made it in. The home was barely quiet as he stood staring out the windows, hoping that none of the dead was coming his way. The boy found his grandpa asleep with the TV on in the living room, sitting back in his lazy boy. The old man snored as he held a beer in one hand and an adult magazine in the other. The old man was sporting some wood, and it made his grandson feel uncomfortable. The teen had to wake the old fella up. The boy turned the TV off, and the old man woke up swinging his arms and cursing up a storm. "God dang it, I'll kill you! Who touched my remote control? I'll take you out your fucking mind with my shotgun. You freaky Friday Care Bear loving son of a gun!" The old man has on a green robe with underwear. His skinny knees shook as he stood with his fist out. He could barely see his grandson as he stared over in his direction.
"Grandpa, it's me, Jonathan!"
"Well, why didn't you say so, you fuck nugget?"
"Grandpa, I just got back from my Halloween party, and outside right now are zombies, and I mean like real zombies. I think it's the end of the world."
"Well, good riddance. This place needs a new makeover. Cops killing folks for no reason. Young kids having kids, and gay folks are kissing in public and getting married.
That's nasty. Goddamn poop pushers, ass bandits, black people accusing unracist people of being racist. My dog died Thursday because a zipper-head woman couldn't see he was taking a shit on the curb.
Grandpa, your sister, Roxana, is a lesbian.
What? She is? I thought that was a man that last Thanksgiving. Goddamn bull dyke brainwashing my siblings.
Grandpa, you went to their wedding. Don't you remember all the gay people that were there? You danced with a man!
I must have blacked out that day. Boy, you know what pisses me off out of all the bullshit in the world?
The undead killing everybody right now?
Jonathan says as he peers out a window.
No, goddammit! I can't raise my Confederate flag anymore without offending blacks. It's my flag and my heritage. If I raise my shitty drawers up in the sky, people will salute that shit and put it on YouTube.
A zombie slams his fist at the front door. Jonathan jumps back and looks at his grandpa.
Well, well, looks like Satan has brought his goons to handle his heavy work.
Grandpa, we need to get out of here!
Jonathan says, backing away from the window. Outside, a crowd of the undead start to come their way. The old man tells his grandson to stay there while he gets his weapons. The old man hurried to his room and got dressed. He put on his business suit, the one he wore years ago when he got divorced. He glanced over at a picture of his ex-wife sitting on a table. He then spoke as if she was there.
See you in hell, bitch!
The old man ran down to his basement and opened up his gun case. He grabbed what he could carry and put the rest in a big brown bag and ran upstairs. Just as he reached the top step, he moaned and placed one hand on his side.
My fucking back will be the death of me!
The old man coughs as the smell of his own gas starts to make him gag.
Fuck nugget.
Jonathan backs up as the door is knocked off its hinges. He yells in horror as the zombies come flooding in. The old man comes out the kitchen from behind Jonathan, holding a machine gun and drinking a power shake he had made 3 days ago.
Hey, you cold-hearted sons of bitches. This is my party, and I'm the one getting it started, not you!
The old man fires his gun as he drinks the thick, milky white liquid. The bodies of the zombies are gunned down and blown back out the home. The old man then fires at their heads, making a mess of guts and blood.
1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4.
After he was finished, he stepped outside with his grandson and smiled.
Hey, help me! I'm hurt!
A man runs out from the darkened street in view of the old man. He has on a blue sweater and is holding his right hand. Jonathan sees a bite mark on the man's hand and tells him to stand back.
Hey dude, you need to back off. You've been bitten.
It's just a little bite. It won't do anything.
Wait.
The old man had opened fire, blowing a hole in the frightened man's face.
There we go. No time to talk about all that racket.
Jonathan's eyes are widened as he is shocked of the brutal action his grandpa took on the neighbor. The old man put his glasses on and told his grandson to follow him. He then handed a gun to him. Jonathan smiled in surprise.
If you shoot me by accident, boy, I'll bury a bullet so far up your asshole you'll see Jesus and God at the same time.
Jonathan shook his head, saying he won't mess up. The two of them walked the neighborhood, killing what dead walkers they could. Jonathan improving his aim with each shot, and the old man dancing the jig as he takes down large numbers of the undead. Out of nowhere, a small group of people run their way.
Wait! Don't shoot him, Grandpa!
Jonathan shouts as he saw his gramps raising his gun. The old man lowered his gun and spit on the ground.
Well, look what we have here. 4 sets of titties, a snot-shitting dumping squirt, and 2 idiots who don't look like they held a gun in their life.
2 women and a man holding a baby with a younger gentleman hurried over to Jonathan and his grandpa.
Please help us.
One of the women cried out. The old man smirked, thinking of all the ways she could help him. The other woman cried and asked them, have they seen her husband? She held a small white poodle in her purse as she bawled her heart out. The dog barked at the old man, and the old man's wise wrinkled eyes scrunched up and he barked at the dog.
I'm sorry, what does he look like, ma'am?
Jonathan asked, as he kept looking out of what was around them. The woman told Jonathan that her husband was wearing a blue sweater when she last seen him. He had tried to pick up their poodle, but the dog bit him, and he ran after the poodle as it fled the house. The dog came back, but the husband never did. Jonathan's eyes looked over at his grandpa, knowing that a mistake had been made. The old man scratched his butt, then grinned at his grandson, placing one finger over his lips. Shh. Last Halloween, I was waiting at my front door, giving out Halloween candy to trick-or-treaters all evening. Some children came alone, some were accompanied by parents. When they held out their bags, I happily dropped the sweets and treats inside. As it grew dark, things started to die down. When it seemed like nobody else was going to come, I decided to call it a night. I was just about to turn my porch light off and go to bed when there was a knock on the door. It seemed much too late for children to still be out, but I grabbed a handful of candy and opened my door. There were 2 children standing on my porch, but they weren't wearing costumes. They were the strangest children I had ever seen in my life. Their skin was waxy and ghostly white. Their eyes were completely black. Their teeth were jagged and too big to fit their mouths. The entire look was more disturbing than anything I had ever seen before. But their clothes were just plain, ordinary t-shirts and pants. Confused, I asked them, "What are you supposed to be? Some kind of monsters?" No, said the children as their mouths widened into broad, leering grins. Tonight, we're dressed as humans. Filled suddenly with a chilling sense of impending doom, I slammed the door and locked it tight. Through the peephole, I could see the 2 strange trick-or-treaters standing outside the door, motionless. Then, they began pounding on the door and telling me to let them in. The door shook and seemed like it was about to fall off its hinges. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. When I looked out through the peephole, they were gone. The street outside was deserted. I don't know about you, but this Halloween I won't be opening the door for anyone. A few years ago, a group of friends planned to spend Halloween at a cemetery close to where they lived. There were 2 boys named Carlos and Miguel, and 2 girls named Paola and Rocha. They were all 16 years old. Initially, when they heard of the idea, the girls refused to go. Paola said that she had a bad feeling about it. However, the boys managed to convince them to change their minds. Finally, Halloween night arrived and the teenagers met at Miguel's house and drove to the cemetery together. When they arrived, there was so much fog that they couldn't hardly see. The cemetery gates were locked. Standing outside, they heard strange and eerie sounds coming from the graveyard. The girls were scared and suggested that they go home. Rocha said that she regretted agreeing to the idea in the first place because she had a feeling that something terrible was going to happen, but the boys refused to let them leave. "Don't be a baby," scoffed Miguel. "We didn't travel this far to just look at the cemetery gates and go home. It's Halloween, Devil's Night." Carlos was about to climb over the cemetery gates, but when he grabbed hold of the metal bars, the gate swung open in front of him with an ominous creak. Suddenly, They heard the bells of the nearby chapel striking midnight. In the distance, a dog howled, and the moon was obscured by clouds. The wind rose up and began to whistle through the trees. Miguel took a Ouija board out from under his coat. "It's time to summon the spirits," he said with a mischievous grin. "Don't worry, it's just a game," said Carlos, trying to reassure the two girls. "Nothing will happen. There's nothing to be scared of." The group of teenagers walked into the cemetery, and when they reached a small tomb in the middle, they stopped. Miguel laid the Ouija board on top of the cold stone, and they all gathered around it. They placed their fingers on the planchette, and Miguel called out to the spirits to contact them. After a few minutes, it claimed to be the ghost of a girl named Sarita who was buried in the cemetery. The boys and girls asked the spirit many questions, and the answers were spelled out on the board. All of a sudden, Rochelle felt something cold and clammy grab hold of her wrist. She let out a horrified scream. The teenagers were spooked and decided to end the game, but the spirit of the girl told them not to. The spirit said they had to keep playing or everyone would die. Miguel ignored the spirit's warning and snapped the Ouija board shut. They were about to leave when it suddenly became very dark. A strong wind rose and it blew through the tombstones. Statues fell from their perches and shattered on the ground. When she saw this, Rochelle freaked out and began to run. She couldn't see anything and stumbled blindly through the darkness. She accidentally tripped and fell into an open grave. She landed on her head and broke her neck. Carlos ran out through the cemetery gates and stumbled into the road. Suddenly, a car came around the corner and slammed into him, killing him instantly and squashing his body into a bloody mess. Paola and Miguel managed to get back to safety of their homes. Paola was so scared that she decided to take a bath to calm herself down before she went to bed. However, when she was getting into the tub, she accidentally bumped into her cell phone and knocked it into the water. Unfortunately, her phone was plugged into the charger and Paola was electrocuted. The next morning, Miguel woke up and went downstairs for breakfast. His parents were waiting for him and broke the bad news. Miguel was surprised and frightened to learn of the deaths of his friends. He knew he was next, but he didn't know what to do. Fearing for his life, he was desperate to get away. He went straight to the airport and took the first flight to Argentina. He was shaking with fear, but he managed to board the plane without any incident. However, when the plane took off, the engines failed and it crashed into the sea. His body was never recovered. Legend has it that after these incidents, no one ever again dared to visit the cemetery on Halloween night. She was 10 years old and she was sick with a fever. It was Halloween. The doctor had given her mother strict orders to see that she stayed in bed. She lay there, listening to the faint laughter coming from downstairs. It made her feel so sad and left out. There was a Halloween party going on downstairs and she was missing all the fun. Her cousins were there and her uncle was the host. He was always the life of the party. She imagined him telling stories and arranging the games. She wished she could be down there too. It had been a long time since anyone visited her. Earlier that day, her cousins had poked their heads into the door and said it was a shame she was sick and would have to miss the party. That only made her feel worse. She felt like everyone had forgotten about her. She was tired of reading and there was nothing else to do. It was dark outside and the lamp was very dim. She just lay there listening and staring at the ceiling. She listened as the old house creaked and groaned. It gave her the chills. She wished there was more light in the room. Dark shadows gathered in the corners of the room. She wasn't one of those people who believe in ghosts, but still, she hoped she never saw one. She heard footsteps coming up the stairs. She listened as they came down the hallway and stopped outside her door. Somebody knocked.
Come in,
she called. The door opened and her uncle stepped into the room. He smiled at her and asked how she was feeling.
Just bored.
She sighed.
What's going on downstairs?
I'm getting ready to put on my costume and scare everyone out their wits, her uncle said. Her face brightened.
Is it scary?
She asked. Extremely, her uncle replied with a grin.
Can I see it?
She asked eagerly. I don't know, said her uncle. It might scare you too much. Oh, please, she begged. Please, can I see it? All right, her uncle replied. When I get dressed up, I'll come in and show you before I go downstairs. You're sure you won't be too scared? Of course I won't, she laughed. Her uncle left, closing the door behind him, and she lay back down, nervous with anticipation. She listened as footsteps disappeared down the hallway. She lay there waiting for some time, wondering what kind of costume her uncle would be wearing. Would it be scary? Would she be frightened? She hoped that he wouldn't jump out at her or burst into the room. Everything was eerily quiet. She couldn't hear anything at all from downstairs. The room was very dark. She was sure the lamp was getting dimmer. The shadows in the corners were growing. She closed her eyes for a little while and waited. Her uncle seemed to be taking ages. Where was he? What was taking him so long? Just then she heard a sound. Her eyes flicked open. It had sounded like a door opening and closing. Her heart began beating quickly. Had he come in? Was he already in the room? She looked at the door. Then as her eyes adjusted to the light, she noticed a figure in the shadows. It was standing between the door and the wardrobe. The figure was small, no higher than a table. It was standing there with its back to her, wrapped in a black cloak that almost blended into the shadows. That was why she hadn't seen it at first. A thrill of fear and excitement ran through her body. She gripped the bedclothes with her hands and gave a little gasp. How had he managed to slip in without her noticing? The figure slowly turned to face her. She tried not to show how frightened she was. The face was hideous. It was a dead, pale face with a long, pointed nose. There were no eyes, just small black holes in the mask. It was too good. It looked almost real. She laughed again nervously as the figure emerged from the shadows and moved towards her. She braced herself. She didn't want to scream. She didn't want him to be able to tell everyone downstairs how much he had frightened her. She stared at the horrible face as it came closer and closer. It was too scary. She couldn't take it. She flung the bedclothes over her head and tried not to scream. She was about to tell her uncle to stop when she heard something. Someone was knocking at the door. She heard her uncle's voice. "I'm ready," he said. "Can I come on in?" On Halloween night in 2002, 4 young girls were walking down a lonely street when they passed by an old church. Standing outside was a man dressed in a clown costume. He asked the girls if they had seen his puppy. When they said they hadn't seen it, the man asked them to help him find the lost dog. The girls agreed to help in the search, and the man in the clown costume led them into the old church. As soon as they went through the door, the man locked it behind him, trapping them in the old building. The girls realized that they had been tricked, but it was too late. They tried to flee, but he was too fast for them. The man tied the girls up and kept them in the old church for hours. He did unspeakable things to them, and their screams echoed off the marble walls, the wooden rafters, and the ornate ceiling. After he had his fun, the poor unfortunate girls thought he would let them go, but they were wrong. He killed them one by one and then escaped into the night. People who saw the clown walking down the street didn't think anything of it, because it was Halloween night and many people were wearing costumes. If only they had known that his costume was red because it was covered in blood. The next morning, the local priest was surprised to find the church doors were unlocked. He went inside and, in the darkness, he heard a mysterious dripping sound. As he walked down the aisle, he saw a pool of blood lying on the altar. He quickly turned on all the lights in the church and gasped in horror at the terrifying sight that met his eyes. The dripping sound was coming from the headless bodies of 4 young girls that were hanging upside down from the rafters. Their blood was dripping down from the bloody stumps of their necks and forming a pool on the altar. But worse was yet to come. The girls' bodies were buried in the small cemetery behind the church. Just a few weeks later, their parents received 4 mysterious packages in the mail. When their parents unwrapped the packages and opened the boxes, they recoiled in horror. The boxes contained the severed heads of their dead daughters. Some people say that if you visit that old church on Halloween night, you will see the ghost of the 4 young girls standing on the altar. According to legend, you can still hear their screams echoing in the darkness. To this day, the man who murdered the girls has never been found. So, if a man ever comes up to you and asks you to help him find his lost puppy, remember this story. It was Halloween, and a young man named Robert was driving home from work. Every house he passed was decorated with Halloween props, like carved pumpkins, plastic skeletons, black paper bats, and witches on broomsticks. It reminded him of all the fun he had as a child, going from house to house trick-or-treating. Distracted by all the Halloween decorations, he missed his turnoff and had to take the long way back to his house. The light was beginning to grow dim, and the road was filled with twists and turns. As he came around a sharp corner, his car skidded on some loose gravel. He lost control and his car slid off the road and plunged into a ditch. For a few moments, Robert was dazed and just sat in his car trying to regain his senses. After making sure he wasn't hurt, he got out and surveyed the damage. Apart from a few scratches, the car looked fine. The problem was that the car was stuck in the ditch, and the rear wheels were raised a few inches from the ground. He would have to call a tow truck. Robert checked his pockets and discovered, to his dismay, that he had left his mobile phone at work. He was in the middle of nowhere, and he had to find a phone. He waited for a few minutes, but when no cars passed by, he decided to start walking. About a mile down the road, he finally spotted a house in the distance. When he came to the gates, there was an old, rusted truck sitting in the driveway. The door of the truck was wide open, swinging in the breeze. There was nobody inside, so he continued on up to the house. It was a dilapidated old building, and some of the shutters were hanging off the windows. There was an eerie silence about the house. The only thing he could hear was the beating of his own heart and the low whistle of the cold October wind. Every now and then, a weather vane on the roof creaked as it swung around. Robert knocked on the front door a few times, but there was no answer. He was about to give up and try to find another house when he noticed something unusual. On the other side of the house, there were some Halloween props and decorations. One of them was a rocking chair with a raggedy scarecrow sitting on it. The scarecrow was wearing a skeleton mask, and as he got closer, he noticed a putrid smell. Stopping in his tracks, he stared at the scarecrow. Something didn't look right. Between the clumps of straw, he thought he could see something that looked like human skin. Filled with a strange mixture of fear and curiosity, he slowly reached out and pulled at the straw. As it fell apart, he was horrified to discover that beneath the straw there was a dead body. The skin was purple, and it was decomposing.
What the fuck?
Robert was still trying to recover from the shock when he heard footsteps coming from the back of the house.
Who's there?
Said a voice. An old man emerged from behind the house, and as soon as he spotted Robert, he stared in surprise.
Who are you? What are you doing here?
He cried. Robert trembling. There's a dead body, he croaked. The old man rushed over and examined the scarecrow. pulling at the straw, he revealed the disgusting face of an old woman.
Miley?
Shouted the old man, his voice shaking.
Miley? What happened?
He turned to Robert, his eyes filling with tears.
Help me carry her into the house,
he cried. Robert didn't know what to do. The man lifted her up by the shoulders, and Robert picked up her feet. Together, they carried her up to the front steps and into the house. They brought her into an empty room and laid her body down on the cold wooden floor.
Stay here while I go call the police,
the man shouted. Before Robert had a chance to reply, the old man was hurrying down the corridor. Robert stood there, still shaking, staring down at the dead woman lying at his feet. After a while, he looked around and realized that there was no furniture. The house seemed to be completely bare, and it was covered with cobwebs. There weren't even any light bulbs in the fixtures. He waited and waited, but the old man never returned. After 20 minutes had passed, he decided to try to find the old man. As soon as he walked out into the corridor, he saw the phone. It was lying on the floor at the end of the corridor, and the line had been ripped out of the wall. With a growing sense of unease, he cautiously explored the rest of the house. There was no sign of the old man. Robert began to panic and ran out the back door. He didn't know where he was going. He just kept running. After about a half an hour, he came to a small general store that lay at the side of the road. Bursting into the shop, sweat pouring down his brow, he begged the shocked young woman behind the counter to call the police. She asked him what was wrong, but he was so out of breath he couldn't answer. Exhausted from all the running, he sat down on the floor and tried to calm himself down. When the police arrived, Robert told them what had happened. He got in the back of the patrol car and directed them back to the old dilapidated house. The police officers went into the house and spent 20 minutes searching it from top to bottom. They didn't find anything. There was no dead body and no old man. The house had been vacant for years. The truck in the driveway had been abandoned almost a decade ago. Robert kept insisting that he had seen the dead body with his own eyes. He gave a description of the old man to the police, but it was clear they didn't believe him. A few days later, Robert went to the police station and asked if they had come up with any information about the old man. The police officer gave him a strange look and said,
"Actually, we did. We checked the property records to see who owned the house. Then we did a little asking around."
"That's great," said Robert. "And what did you find?"
"Well, there was an old man who used to live in that house. Seemed like he fit your description. He had a wife too. She disappeared and nobody heard from her again. Some people suspected he murdered her and buried her in that yard. But there was never any real evidence. Just a lot of loose talk and rumors spread by the locals. Nothing concrete until now."
"Have you arrested him?" asked Robert.
"We'd like to,"
said the policeman.
"but there's just one problem."
"What's that?" asked Robert. The police gave him a weary smile and said,
"He died in 1963 on Halloween night."
There is supposedly a street in Oklahoma City called Carrie Place, where rumor has it a little girl named Carrie was murdered, and to this day, late at night, you can see her ghost walking around or playing in the backyard. The story begins in the late 1950s when a little girl stayed after school one evening to play on the swings. While playing there alone, she was spotted by a crazed man who was carrying an axe. He approached the little girl, but she managed to escape the insane man's evil clutches and ran down the street, screaming for help. The little girl ran from house to house, pounding on the doors and windows, begging the people inside to help her. Unfortunately, the residents were all too terrified to open their doors for the little girl, and the axe-wielding murderer chased her down and caught her just as she reached her own house. On her front porch, little Carrie was murdered by the man with the hatchet. The killer chopped up her body, and stuffed her remains inside a big flower pot that stood outside her front door. According to the legend, the white porch of little Carrie's house was completely covered in blood, and no matter how many times her parents washed and scrubbed it, the stains could not be removed. To add to the spookiness, little Carrie's body parts are said to be buried in the backyard of the Hatchet house, and the neighborhood was renamed Carrie Place in her memory. But shortly after the murder, something strange happened to every house on the block where the residents had ignored Carrie's desperate pleas for help as she fled from her killer. The people in those houses woke up one morning to find that their front porches had been painted red. People say that the porches were painted red by the ghost of little Carrie as a mark of their guilt in the girl's death. Today, people who have driven by the house in the daytime say that the area has an odd, creepy feeling, and the windows of the Hatchet house have carvings in the shutters in shape of hatchets. They also say the school swing set has been seen swinging on its own ever since. People have even reported hearing the haunting screams of the little girl echoing in the moonlight street. Every Halloween, local children flock to the historic district of Carrie's Place, trying to find the notorious house with the hatchet cutouts on its shutters. They go from door to door trick-or-treating, but when people open their doors, instead of saying trick or treat, the kids ask, "Can little Carrie come out to play?" The Halloween party was a blast. Stephen and his friend Cody walked home from the party dressed in their costumes. Cody a scarecrow, Stephen a zombie. Stephen blushed as he told Cody how he made out with Lisa Norman, one of the most prettiest girls at their school. Cody searched his bag of candy as he walked, looking for a candy bar. The boys talked and laughed as they made their way down the sidewalk. It was chilly out, and the two friends began to walk faster. As they walked, Cody spotted a clown standing in the light of a street lamp. The clown faced him, holding something behind his back. The clown waved at him. "That's freaky," Stephen says, nudging Cody. Stephen told Cody it must be a drunk weirdo. The two boys walked on, but still kept glancing back at the clown. The boys reached Cody's house, and Cody asked him if he wanted to stay over because the walk to Stephen's house was a couple of blocks longer than his. Stephen said he was cool and that he'll see him at school. Cody gave his friend a handshake, then they both said their goodbyes. Stephen crossed his arms, then headed down the sidewalk. Stephen turns around to see the clown. The clown sat up in a tree staring down at him with his eyes bulging out of his sockets. Stephen gasped in fright, nearly falling over. Stephen walked away from the tree, and the clown squeezed his red nose and it made a honk sound. As soon as Stephen turned the corner, the clown was 14 feet away from him, standing in the yard of someone's house holding a black balloon. Stephen stopped in his tracks, not knowing what to do or say. The clown smiled at him, then popped the balloon. The sound echoed into the night. Just as the balloon popped, the clown ran at Stephen. Stephen took off as fast as he could, and the clown reached for him. "Get off of me!" Stephen ran across the street to the other side of the sidewalk and looked at the clown. The clown stood across the street silently, following him with his oversized eyeballs. Stephen flipped the clown off and ran forward. The clown smiled big with blood-stained teeth. Stephen crossed a person's backyard, then ran out into his street. He was out of breath and trying to calm his nerves. He looked up to find that he was finally alone. He then heard someone running his way. He looked for the person but couldn't see them coming. He ran and shouted out for the clown to leave him alone. "Leave me alone!" As he ran, he felt gloved hands grab his shoulder and pull. He yanked away and ran straight to his house. He stopped as he reached the front of his house. He placed his hands on his knees and knelt down trying to catch his breath. Then, as he stared at the sidewalk, two black boots stepped in his view. The boots have little red and purple smiley faces all over them. Stephen slowly brought his eyes up to the hideously smiling clown. He tried to yell, but the clown grabbed him by the neck and lifted him off his feet. With one hand, the clown opened his mouth, revealing a tongueless mouth with blood dripping from it. Steven struggled as the clown smiled at him. He couldn't break free of the clown's grip. The clown then reached into his pockets with his free hand and grabbed the black handle of a knife. Steven squirmed around looking for anyone to save him. He tried to yell and punch the clown, but the clown wasn't willing to let go of him. Steven felt a sharp pain in his lower abdomen, and he began to cry. The clown's eyeballs poked out as he stared into Steven's dying eyes. The clown's blood-stained smile stretched, and he slid the blade up and pressed it in deeper. The next morning, a group of dirt bike riders were traveling through the woods. The boy in front stopped his bike as he went off the path. He looked back as some of his fellow bikers passed by. He saw something in the bushes back there. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew it was something out of place. A few of his friends drove over to him and followed him, asking him what he was doing. The boy shushed them, then stopped in his tracks. He covered his mouth and started to cry. Another boy looked over his shoulder, then yelled in horror. Laying in the tall grass in the bushes was Steven's broken body. His mouth was dislocated and ripped wide open. His tongue is missing. Both of his arms are snapped back from the elbow and folded behind his back. Steven's face was painted like a clown. His eyes were pulled out from the sockets and laid on top of his forehead. His entrails hung out his stomach and his fingers were missing. The thing that frightened the boys the most was that Steven was still breathing. If you're out late at night and you feel that someone is following you, you better hope it isn't Jackal the clown. There was a young boy named Melvin who had always had a smile on his face. A lot of people assumed he was a little weak in the head. At school, he was always bullied by his classmates. They thought he was stupid and delighted in playing nasty tricks and malicious pranks on him. Despite being the butt of all jokes, Melvin still tagged along with the other boys, hoping that someday they would accept him. All he desired in life was their friendship. But they just rejected him, treated him like a fool. While he was constantly bullied by most of the kids in his class, the ringleader was a boy named Tyrell. He was especially mean to Melvin and never missed an opportunity to humiliate Melvin in front of the whole school.
Look at him. Piece of shit.
Tyrell often punched and kicked Melvin just for fun. Sometimes, he even encouraged other kids to beat Melvin up just so he could watch and laugh. Whenever the other kids called him names, taunted him, mocked him, or played tricks on him, Melvin would just smile or give a weak laugh. He tried to pretend that he was unaffected by the malicious treatment he received. However, his smile was like a mask. Behind it, his heart was breaking. One Halloween night, Tyrell and his friends were gathered in the center of town. When they spotted Melvin walking home from school, Tyrell told them he had come up with an amazing prank to play on the boy. "Just come along," he told his friends. Then he ran over, grabbed Melvin by the scruff of his neck and dragged him over to the group. "Tonight, we're going to dig up a corpse," Tyrell announced. Come on guys," replied Melvin. "Please don't joke around about stuff like that." "Nobody's joking," said Tyrell. "Remember old Miss Jefferson who died last year? Well, tonight we're going to the cemetery. We're going to dig her up and leave her in front of the school to freak everyone out. Now, we're going to do the digging, but we need someone to do the carrying. We've chosen you." "Give me a break, Tyrell," pleaded Melvin. "You can't ask me to do something like that." "I'm not asking you. I'm telling you," said Tyrell in a threatening voice. "You'll do what you were told. If you don't show up, we'll give you the beating of your life tomorrow in school. Don't tell anyone about this, or you can consider yourself a dead man." As darkness filled the night, Tyrell met his friends at the cemetery. They gathered around as he explained exactly what he had planned. He was going to disguise himself as a corpse and hide himself in the graveyard among the headstones. He opened his bag and showed them the costume and a latex mask he had brought with him. When he gets here, you guys send him into the cemetery and tell him to find old Miss Jefferson's grave. There's a freshly dug grave in the middle of the cemetery. I'm going to be hiding in it. When he gets close enough, I'll grab him and drag him into the grave with me. I'm going to scare him so bad, he'll probably have a heart attack. The other boys thought it was a great plan and couldn't hide their excitement. Tyrell got into his costume and went into the cemetery to hide. He climbed down into the open grave and waited patiently. This is going to be the best Halloween prank ever, he said to himself as he pulled on his latex mask. Half an hour later, Melvin finally arrived and met the other boys at the entrance to the graveyard. He was smiling, as usual, but in his eyes the boys could see that he was scared to death. He had his hands in his pockets and was visibly shaking. The other boys sent him into the graveyard and told him to find the grave. As he walked deeper into the cemetery, the darkness seemed to close around him. The only light he had was from the screen of his cell phone. He held it up to try to light his way. Melvin walked behind the tombstones, his shoulders slouched and his hands trembling. Every little sound he heard caused him to jump in fear or shake in anticipation. Finally, he reached the middle of the cemetery and arrived at the freshly dug grave. As he cautiously approached the headstone to read the inscription, a hand came out of the grave and grabbed him by the ankle. Melvin let out a cry, and suddenly, the hand dragged him down into the grave. Melvin lay at the bottom of the hole, coughing and sputtering. Wiping the mud from his eyes, he saw a horrible sight. There was a corpse standing over him. Its face was pale and wizened. Its eyes were sunken, and its skull was cracked. Melvin struggled to his feet and pulled a large knife out of his pocket. Tyrell was horrified. Wait, don't stab me!" he shouted, retreating quickly. "Why not?" asked Melvin. In a panic, Tyrell fell backwards and became tangled in his costume. Melvin towered over him, brandishing the knife. The blade glinted in the moonlight. "Wait! You don't understand!" Tyrell cried, desperately tearing off the latex mask. "It's me! Tyrell! We were just playing a prank on you!" Melvin continued to advance on him, clutching the knife tightly, raising it above his head. "You're the one who doesn't understand," said Melvin. His voice was suddenly cold and his face was twisted in rage. "I knew it was a prank all along." One night, I went to the theater to see a movie. There was a horror film festival about classic zombie movies. Because I had nothing to do, I decided to go to see one. I paid for my ticket and bought a bag of chips and a large soft drink at the counter. Then, I made my way into the darkened theater and found my seat. The theater was almost empty. There were only a few other people watching the movie. In the row behind me, there was an old man sitting to my right. 3 seats down, there was a big fat man. The lights went out completely and the movie started. I got comfortable in my seat and began munching on my chips and sipping my drink. The movie was actually quite scary. After a few minutes, I heard a loud, irritating laugh. Looking to my right, I saw the fat man bouncing around in his seat and laughing uncontrollably. He threw his head back and let out a loud guffaw at every horrible scene. It was extremely annoying. A few minutes later, the old man in the row behind us leaned forward and placed his hand on the fat man's shoulder. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "You're disturbing me with your laughter. Can you please be quiet?" The fat man scowled and turned around in a rude manner. He refused to be quiet and told the old man to mind his own business.
Mind your own business.
I would have liked to stand up and tell the fat man to shut up, but I didn't have the guts. A few minutes later, I was sitting there watching the movie when I noticed I didn't hear the fat man's annoying laugh anymore. I glanced over at him and saw that he was asleep. He was slumped in his chair with his head back and his mouth open. I hope he doesn't start snoring, I thought as I continued munching on my chips and sipping my drink. After a while, I happened to glance at the fat man again. He was still lying there motionless. Then I happened to notice a dark patch beneath his seat. It looked kind of like a puddle spreading out beneath him. As I was staring at him, the screen got brighter for a few moments. I gasped in horror. The fat man's neck had been sliced open from ear to ear and blood was dripping down his front and forming a pool on the floor. All of a sudden on the movie screen, a zombie appeared out of nowhere and attacked someone. I let out a high-pitched scream and almost jumped out of my seat. Just then, I felt a hand on my shoulder and a voice spoke to me. "Excuse me, sir. You are disturbing me with your screams and your constant munching. Can you please be quiet?" One evening, a teenage girl came home from school and found the house empty. Her mother had left her a sticky note on the fridge for her. It said her mother was out shopping and her younger brothers were at soccer practice. She was alone in the house. The girl locked the front door just in case. Then she put her mobile phone on the hall table, hung her keys on a hook, and went upstairs to her bedroom to change clothes. As she was getting undressed, she saw a sticky note on her bed. She picked it up and looked at the message. It read, "There is someone in the house." She assumed it was her younger brothers playing a trick on her, so she crumbled the note. "Okay, very funny guys," she said. What happened? Did you two miss soccer practice?" No answer. "Hey, I know you're here," she yelled. "If I find out you two went through my stuff again, you're dead." The girl went downstairs to the kitchen to fix herself a snack. When she opened the refrigerator, she discovered another sticky note. It read, "There's nobody here but you and me." She dropped the note and said, "Hey guys, this is not funny anymore. Stop it." There was no answer. The girl went to the front door and tried the knob, but it was locked. She turned around to get her keys, but the hook she had hung them on was empty. Then, the girl glanced down at the hall table and saw that her mobile phone had disappeared as well. On the table, there was another sticky note. It read, "You're not going anywhere." She screamed and picked up the phone to call the police. There was no dial tone. She grabbed the phone line and to her horror she realized it had been cut. There was another note lying by the phone. It read, "No phone, no police, no way out." Trembling with fear, the girl ran to the back door. When she tried to turn the handle, she found that it was also locked. Just then, she spotted another note stuck to the back door. It simply read, "Look up." So she looked up and saw her pet cat speared through the heart and pinned to the ceiling with a kitchen knife. She screamed in terror and ran to the nearest window. She tried punching and kicking it, but she couldn't smash the glass. It wouldn't even crack. There was a sticky note on the window. It read, "You can't catch a break, can you?" The frightened girl desperately tried to think of what she should do. She needed a knife to defend herself. She ran into the kitchen, but when she pulled out the drawer, it was empty. All the knives were gone, and in their place was yet another sticky note. It read, "Children shouldn't play with sharp things." She ran upstairs to her bedroom and locked the door. She checked inside the closet and under the bed. There was nobody there. She breathed a sigh of relief. Then, all of a sudden, her TV turned on by itself. It was loud and static. On the screen, she found another note. It read, "Now I have you where I want you." The girl flew into a panic and started yelling and screaming, "Help! Help! Somebody help me!" Just then, she remembered her laptop computer. She flipped open the lid and quickly sent an email to her best friend. "Help! This is not a joke. Call the police. There's someone in my house." Minutes later, she heard the sound of sirens outside. The police arrived and broke down the front door. 2 officers burst into her bedroom and found her cowering in a corner, shaking and quivering with fear. The police searched the entire house from top to bottom, examining every nook and cranny, but they found no one. As the officers were interviewing her, one of them spotted a sticky note attached to her back. He pulled it off and handed it to her. It read, "I was this close." I will tell you a story about something terrible that happened on Halloween. This story is true, so they say, and it made my hair stand on end just to hear it. It all happened many years ago in my town, which at that time was just a little town between the mountains of Catalonia and Spain. The town was a little more than a small square with a church, a park, a prison, and a school, with all the houses clustered around. The town was very proud of their school since it had been voted the best school in the province. It was the morning of October 31st, Halloween, and a class of students were doing arts and crafts in their classroom. Some were cutting skeletons out of sheets of paper. Some were painting vampire bats and others were drawing pumpkins. The students were all aged between 8 and 9 years old. Their teacher was a beautiful young woman who had only been working at the school for 1 month. While the children were having fun preparing the Halloween decorations, the teacher turned on the radio to listen to the weather forecast. She was planning to organize an outdoor Halloween party for the kids later that day and wanted to be sure that it wouldn't rain. Suddenly, the weather forecast was interrupted by a news bulletin.
This is an important announcement. A convicted murderer has escaped from the local prison and is on the loose. He is described as armed and very dangerous. Please do not attempt to apprehend him. The police will.
Oh my God. The teacher rushed across the room and switched off the radio. She did not want to alarm the children, but it was too late. The children had all heard the broadcast and were very frightened by the news. They knew that the prison was very near the school. The teacher tried to reassure them and told them not to worry. A few minutes later, the school principal made an announcement over the intercom. "Attention all teachers. We have been informed that police are dealing with a very serious situation that is occurring right now in the town. All teachers are advised to lock the doors and windows of their classrooms until the police get this situation under control. I repeat, lock all the doors and windows until further instruction. That's all." The teacher told the class to stay calm. She took out her key and locked the classroom door. Then she went around and closed every window, making sure that they were secured and nobody could get in. One little girl raised her hand and asked could she go to the bathroom. The teacher didn't want to let her go, but the girl insisted. The teacher finally relented and gave her permission to go to the bathroom. After all, it was unlikely that the murderer would come to the school. She told the girl that when she came back, she would have to give a secret knock at the classroom door. Then they would know that it was her and they could let her back in. The code was 3 taps and 2 scratches. Tap, 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 scratch, scratch. The girl left to go to the bathroom and the teacher locked the door behind her. To take the children's minds off the scary situation, she started telling stories. After 20 minutes had passed and the girl still had not returned, the teacher began to get worried. What's taking her so long? She wondered out loud. Suddenly, they could hear footsteps in the corridor. Everybody in the classroom froze. Then they heard a noise at the door. Tap, 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 scratch, scratch. "She's back," sighed the teacher in relief. She walked over and took out her key. "What if it's not her?" asked one little boy who was shivering with fright. The teacher hesitated with her keys inches from the lock. Again, they heard a noise at the door. Tap, 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 scratch, scratch. "It must be her," said the teacher. She put the key into the door and unlocked it. Suddenly, the classroom door burst open and a tall man was standing there. In his right hand, he was holding a knife. In his left hand, he was holding the little girl's severed head. The escaped murderer came into the classroom smiling from ear to ear. The children were trapped inside. All that could be heard in the corridors of the school were screams of terror and squeals of pain. In the chaos, the teacher managed to break a window and jump out. She barely escaped with her life and crawled to safety. The children, however, were not so lucky. When the police arrived, they found the murderer sitting in the middle of the classroom. The floor, walls, and ceiling were covered in blood. The little body parts lay scattered around him. He had chopped up every child in the classroom into tiny pieces. They found the headless body of the little girl in the third stall of the bathroom. The police figured out what had probably happened that October day. The escaped prisoner must have been hiding in the toilet when the girl was asking for permission to go to the bathroom. He must have surprised her in the stall and forced her to tell him the password. When she did, he cut off her head. Today, the teacher is in a psychiatric hospital. She never recovered from the incident and can't stop repeating over and over again, tap, 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 scratch, scratch. Tap, 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 scratch, scratch. The school was abandoned because parents refused to send their children there. There were too many bad memories. The school was left just the way it was when the murders occurred. They say that if you visit the old school building and go into the classroom, you can still see the blood still dripping down the walls. If you are brave enough, you could even go to the bathroom. Just tap 3 times and scratch 2 times on the door of the third stall. Then open it. You will see the headless body of the little girl sitting on the toilet. A long time ago, in the late 90s, a girl hung herself at her home. She was only 13 years old. She died on Halloween night. Her name was Candy Hollow. She lived in a nice suburban neighborhood with good neighbors and families who knew each other well. Her family was very religious and didn't celebrate holidays, calling them pagan holidays and not what God wanted. She was told not to go trick-or-treating with her friends. Her friends begged her to go after school. Her boyfriend Scott even wanted her to go. Her friends wanted to get Candy and go to a haunted house that the school made for the kids, but Candy couldn't go. On Halloween night, Candy snuck out into the night dressed in her thick black coat with a large hoodie. She ran, looking for her friends as kids dressed in costumes walked down the streets trick-or-treating. Some kids rode their bikes to houses. Some kids walked in groups or with parents. Candy put on her hoodie as the cold air was bothering her ears. She walked down the street with her hands in her pockets. She stopped at a friend's Halloween party. She went inside as kids ran in and out of the home. Candy said hi to a couple of her friends, and she asked them if they had seen Scott, her boyfriend. One of her friends pointed to the backyard. Candy smiled and walked over to the back door. She looked out the window, spotting Scott kissing another girl. A girl that looked more prettier than her. A girl who was a bit of a bully at their school. Candy felt a pain inside. She backed away, fleeing the home. Some of her friends tried to stop her, feeling worried, but she ran away. Candy ran home crying. She knocked on the door, forgetting that she had snuck out for the night. Her parents answered it, then were shocked that she didn't listen to them. Her mother gave her a whooping with a belt as she was chased into her bedroom. Candy cried as her mother spanked her hard, beating her over the arms and face as she tried to move away. Her father came in after and grounded her for the next 2 months. No more friends coming over, no more sleepovers, no staying late at school for special projects, no Nintendo, no television, just schoolwork and reading and church and family time. Candy cried out to her father, begging him not to do this. He slapped her across the face, knocking her into the floor. "You better not disobey us ever again," the father shouts before slamming the door shut. Candy laid on the floor sobbing. She felt alone and heartbroken. The boy she loved cheated on her. Her parents never listened to her. Candy left her bedroom after hearing her parents go back to their room, shutting their door. She went into the garage and found an old rope bundled up inside of an open box with ripped duct tape on it. She opened the garage door, then dragged the box outside. She dragged the box out across the front yard. As she did, she cried. A group of kids walked by in their costumes and saw her and went on. She moved the box over to a tall tree in front of the yard. She picked up the rope and rounded it up around her arm and shoulder. She then climbed the tree all the way up to the highest tree branch she could get to. She then tied the rope on it and then around her neck. She sat up in the tree whimpering, trying to convince herself she shouldn't do it. A group of trick-or-treaters walked by with their parents on the sidewalk. Candy saw them as they passed by. She saw how happy they all looked in their cute costumes. Candy wiped the tears from her eyes, then decided it was a bad idea to take her own life. Just as she started to climb back over, her left foot slipped off the branch, making her fall from one side, losing her balance. She fell, and the rope yanked her neck, snapping it as her body stopped in mid-air. The kids turned, as they all heard the sound of a scream being cut short. All the children screamed and cried as they looked up to see the girl in the hoodie hanging in the large tree. The parents tried to cover their eyes and move them away quickly. Some kids walked over thinking it was a Halloween prank or just a fake body in the tree. But Candy's parents came outside after hearing the kids screaming. They realized it was their daughter hanging in the tree. She still had on her black coat and her hoodie covering her face. The mother collapsed and cried, holding her husband's leg. The father stood staring at Candy's body with tears running down his cheeks. Years later, after Candy's death, there was a scary story going around about the girl in the hoodie curse. If you see her on Halloween, be nice to her, give her candy, and she won't follow you. Or if you see her, don't look at her twice or she will follow you. If you as so much as speak to her or run from her, you will die within the next 2 days, mysteriously or by your own hand. Kids had passed down the story of the girl in the hoodie for years. The story of Candy Hollow went on, and kids mostly didn't go trick-or-treating without their parents. Some of the older kids did, not thinking the story was true. There's another story tied to Candy's death, a story of an evil spirit dressed in a black coat with a large hoodie covering its face. The entity walks around at night on Halloween with its hands in its pockets. Some people have witnessed her. Some have spotted her following them as they went from house to house, then she would vanish. There is a story about a group of kids walking through a park on Halloween and seeing a girl high up in a tree crying. She then dropped down hanging herself. The kids all ran, and weeks later, they all went insane. They told police, their parents, teachers, friends of what they seen, but no one truly believed them. They soon ended up hanging themselves. One by one, each who saw the girl in the hoodie killed themselves. They say she will appear and just follow you around watching you trick or treat. She will not harm you if you are a good person or innocent. Only troublemakers and people looking to call on her spirit she will harm. Some she will attack just because they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, not caring how good or bad the person is. One Halloween night in 2011, a young boy was getting ready for trick-or-treating. He put on his medieval wizard costume and fake white beard. He looked in his bathroom mirror at himself and held a crooked old stick he had gotten from outside. The boy turns to look at his door after hearing knocking. He walks over, then opens it up, only to find his little brother Justin standing there in a homemade robot suit. The suit has little lights flickering on it, and even the helmet the boy held has lights flashing on and off. "John, Dad said I can go trick-or-treating with you." John let out a sigh, not liking the idea. He just wanted to hang with his friends on Halloween night, not look after his little brother. John patted his little brother on the head, then went to his father's study to try to convince him to not make him take his brother trick-or-treating. The father told John he's too busy to take Justin trick-or-treating and that John should do it. John hated it when his father gave him that look. The look that if you don't do as I say, there will be consequences. John told his father, all right, then left the study. John's mother baked Halloween cookies and made caramel apples. She was helping out with the neighbor's haunted house party next door. John bit a piece of it and shook his head, telling her with a mouthful of cookie, it's good. Justin put on his helmet and walked outside. He held his orange bag for candy in his hands. John stepped outside and thumped his little brother's helmet. The lights flickered and some blinked fast.
Whoa! Dad really went all out on your costume.
John says, admiring the technology. Justin smiled with blushing red cheeks. John's friends walked across the street laughing and shoving one another. There was Adam, dressed like a mad scientist with a white wig on. Charlie, he came dressed as Bigfoot. He kept taking the mask off because it was making him sweat. Amanda, she came dressed as a vampire. She wore a cape and leather. John thought she looked very hot in her costume. Billy, the tallest of the bunch, was wrapped in white bandages. He came as a mummy. What's he doing here? Asked Billy, pointing at Justin. John looked over at his brother, then back at his friends.
I'm sorry, but Mom and Dad said he has to come with me.
He better not tell on us because we do cuss, Charlie says, putting his Bigfoot mask back on.
Guys, he won't say a word about anything.
John tells his friends. What's that? A retard helmet to keep him from falling on his head? Adam asked John with laughter. John looked at his little brother. He wanted to make fun of him, but he knew how easy it would be to hurt Justin, so he didn't laugh or say anything to offend him. John told Adam his dad made the suit, and it's all battery powered from the belt his little brother wore. Adam stood there with a goofy smile on his face, waiting for John to make fun of his little brother, but John didn't. Instead, he told everyone to follow him to a good place to get lots of candy. Amanda shoved Adam, letting him know he was crossing the line.
Stop being an asshole.
Ouch! As the night went on, the group stocked up on candy, then went from the neighborhood to another neighborhood. When they got to the 9th block on the last street, they were approached by 3 boys on bikes. The boys have on backpacks and wore ski masks. They stopped in front of John and his friends. One of the boys got off his bike, then walked over to John. He then opened his backpack and held it open. John looked inside and saw that it was empty. The masked kid shook his backpack, suggesting something from John. Kid, pour your candy in my fucking bag before I fuck all of you up. The masked boy says to John. Charlie and Adam tried to walk away quickly, fearing that they would be threatened. One of the other masked boys rides his bike over to them and tells them to do the same thing. The kids looked older and much bigger than them. I said, put your fucking candy in my fucking backpack, bitch. John shook his head, no. The kid laughed at John, then slapped him in the face. John dropped his bag of candy. He stumbled back. His little brother began to cry. The boy then tilted his head to the side, suggesting John do as he says. John looked behind himself at his friends. Billy stood with his head down, and Amanda just looked at John, sighing to him to go ahead to let the guy have his candy. John picked up his bag of candy and poured it into the other kid's backpack. The boy patted John on the head, then told him he did the right thing. He then went over to John's little brother, Justin. Crybaby, pour your candy into my bag. Now. John couldn't believe that this guy was stooped so low to be threatening his little brother. Justin, in a hurry, dumped his candy into the backpack. The other masked boys got Charlie's and Adam's candy. Amanda stood looking at the masked boys with anger. The boys walked past her to Billy. Billy is taller than everyone there and a bit of a bigger kid. But Billy wasn't the kind of kid who would fight or punk anyone, who was mostly a jokester. Billy looked at the boy as he approached him. You must think you're a big tough guy, the masked kid says as he shoves Billy with one hand. Billy backs up, then starts to tear up. Put your candy in my backpack, you big idiot. Billy lifts his bag up, then pours it in. After getting the candy they wanted, The masked boys tossed their backpacks over their shoulders and got on their bikes. Then they all rode off whistling and laughing down the street. Then, as they got far away, they came back speeding towards John and his friends, nearly hitting them. As they came at them, they tossed rotten eggs at John and his friends. John grabbed his little brother and covered him from being hit. The others were hit: Billy, Amanda, Adam, and Charlie. The masked boys rode off into the night laughing. Charlie got so upset he ran home. Adam walked away cussing up a storm. Billy stood there wiping off the busted eggs on his costume. His face was red with anger. John had never seen Billy so mad in his life. Billy looked like he would kill them. Billy walked off saying he's done for the night. Amanda was only hit in her cape. She took it off and folded it up, then tossed it in a dumpster nearby. John tried to comfort his little brother as his little brother was crying. He knew he didn't want to return home with his little brother all sad on Halloween. His parents would find out that they didn't stay on their street where they knew pretty much everyone. Amanda gave her bag of candy to Justin and told him he can have it. Justin said thank you as he whimpered. John smiled at Amanda, saying he will pay her back by saying he owes her one. The three of them walked on to other houses to get candy. John noticed a girl in a hoodie walking behind them. She didn't carry a candy sack or a bag of any kind. They went to 4 houses on Elmer Street. One house gave them king-size candy bars. Another gave them small cartons of apple juice, which was weird for them. Another house gave them toothbrushes. The woman was dressed as Alice from Wonderland. She told them to brush before bed and after breakfast. It was getting late and John was tired. They didn't get as much candy as they had before. He decided to call it a night. He turned around and spotted the girl in the hoodie. She held a plastic bag in one hand. She waved at John.
Why are you following us?
John asked. The girl leaned her head to the side, then walked over to him. John couldn't see her face at all, as the hoodie covered it and left only darkness within the center.
I want to go trick-or-treating with you,
the girl in the hoodie says. John looked over at Amanda and his brother.
I'm really sorry, but we're going home. It's getting late.
You have one more house to go to. Let me show you. They have the best candy.
John shrugged his shoulders and asked Amanda if she wanted to go. Amanda said sure. Justin was happy. He took the hooded girl's hand and walked with her as she led the way. Justin looked up at the girl with wonder in his eyes of what she looked like. His hand was feeling cold as he was holding her gloved hand. The streets were starting to clear of costume-wearing kids. A few cars passed by them with music blasting, probably some college kids leaving a party. They all stopped in front of a large home with trees in the front yard. The girl waved at John to follow her around the back of the house. She walked over to 2 large doors leading to a basement. She looked down at Justin and patted his hand gently. Justin let her hand go, then she opened the basement. Inside, on the floor were 6 backpacks full of candy. Some of the candy were stuffed in pillowcases. John recognized the backpacks. They were the same ones the masked boys used. This is their house. John got scared, fearing he was led to a trap. The girl in the hoodie sighed with her right hand for John to take the candy.
It's yours. Take it and go.
The voice sounded odd to John, his brother, and Amanda, almost ghostly. Amanda didn't waste any time. She grabbed 2 backpacks and made a run for it. John put on a backpack, then told his little brother to grab one. John looked at the girl in the hoodie, not knowing how she knew or why she was doing this. For some reason, she creeped him out, but at the same time, he felt good about her.
Who are you?
John asked. She stood silently, facing him with her hands in her pockets. She then spoke.
They're coming. If they find you, they will beat you into a coma. You need to go now.
Her words scared him. He nodded his head at her. John grabbed 2 backpacks of candy, then told the girl in the hoodie to come with him, but she shook her head no. John's little brother grabbed his white wizard gown and tugged on it.
Let's go, John. Let's go.
The basement door opens from upstairs inside the house. The sounds of footsteps is heard coming down. John picked up his brother, then ran out of the basement from the back exit doors. He got outside and put his brother down, then held his hand. He then led him away from the house. The girl in the hoodie disappeared. The three masked boys found that they had been robbed. They saw the basement doors were open from the outside. They ran out and searched the backyard, yelling out that they would kill whoever stole their candy. Then all of a sudden, they all heard the sound of a girl crying. They looked up and spotted a girl in a black coat standing on the tree branch up over them. A rope hung from around her neck attached to the tree. She looked down at them with glowing white eyes. The light from her eyes gave light to her ghostly pale face. The boys all yelled in horror at the sight. The girl in the hoodie stepped out, lifting her foot off the branch, letting her body drop. As she plummeted down, her neck snapped, and she swung back and forth with no life in her body. The boys yelled as they watched on. The hoodie fell from her head, revealing a pale face with tears streaming out from her eyes. The sound of the rope rubbing into the wood of the tree as the body rocks back and forth is heard. The boys then fled, shouting and screaming into the night. The police came and found nothing to what they were told. Since that day, the boys could not sleep or even daydream without seeing the girl in the hoodie watching them, following them, hanging in a tree outside their windows. And one by one, they all were driven insane and ended up taking their own lives. 2 slit their wrists and 1 hung himself. As for John, he never knew about the girl in the hoodie story until years later when he was in his 20s. But as a kid, he just remembered her as a nice girl who he couldn't identify, who helped him get him and his friends candy back. He wished he could see her again just to thank her and to know who she was. As for Candy Hollow, she still lurks in the shadows on Halloween, sometimes following trick-or-treaters or staying at a distance just watching. Trick or treat. Four girls were walking home from a Halloween party in 2002. They were walking by an old abandoned factory that stood next to a field. The factory was said to be haunted, and many people in the area refused to set foot inside the factory grounds. When they got to the middle of the field, one of the girls said it would be fun to explore the old factory. The other girls were scared at first, but eventually one of them agreed to do it just for fun, so they can tell their friends at school about it. 2 of the girls climbed over the fence and the other 2 girls waited outside for them. After about 20 minutes had passed, the 2 remaining girls started getting worried. Suddenly, they heard blood-curdling screams coming from inside the old factory. It sounded like their friends. Terrified, the 2 girls ran all the way home. The 2 girls who went into the factory were never seen again. Today, the factory still stands. They say that if you dare to enter the grounds on Halloween night, then you too will vanish, never to be seen again. On a dark Halloween night in 2003, a bus driver was traveling down a deserted street when he saw a beautiful young woman at the side of the road. He halted at the bus to stop and she climbed on board. The woman took a seat at the back of the bus and stared straight ahead. When the bus driver looked in his mirror, he noticed that the woman was staring directly at him, never blinking. But when he looked back over his shoulder, the woman was sitting with her back to him. The driver began to get really creeped out. He couldn't understand what was going on. Then, he came to the end of his route. It was the last stop and he pulled over and opened the doors of the bus. The woman didn't get out. She just sat there, motionless, with her back to him. The driver walked towards the back of the bus and saw that the woman was covering her face with her hands. He tried talking to her, but she wouldn't answer. He took hold of her arms and tried to make her show her face. The woman refused and struggled out of his grip. Finally, she spoke. "You will not like what you see." And suddenly, she dropped her hands and turned to him. Her face was horribly disfigured. Lumps of flesh were falling off and a skeletal face could be seen beneath. It is said that they found the bus driver the next morning, lying unconscious outside the bus. He spent 2 weeks in a coma, and when he awoke, he had lost all control of his senses. They put him in a mental institution, and this is the story he told from his cell. October 30th, Halloween evening. Carrie sat in class working on arts and crafts, creating Halloween decorations. She wore a dress covered in small smiley pumpkins. She has a ponytail tied with an orange ribbon, and her socks are orange with black cats with yellow eyes on them. She loves Halloween, the candy, and all the creepy decorations. Two of Carrie's friends came to her after class and told her that they saw a talking jack-o'-lantern on Mr. Wood's porch on their way to school. They told Carrie that they heard the jack-o'-lantern whispering at the house, as if speaking to Mr. Woods as he stayed inside the house. The two girls were deathly pale and frightened. Carrie laughed and told them to stop trying to scare her. Both girls said that the jack-o'-lantern turned around then grinned at them with the candlelight burning inside of it. Carrie started to believe them, as they pressed her to go with them to Mr. Wood's house. Carrie lived the next street over, and she didn't see a problem with going to see the jack-o'-lantern on her way home. Carrie thought someone was playing a trick on them, or maybe something weird was really happening. The girls left the school. As they walked down the sidewalk, they held each other's hands and walked side by side. When the girls arrived at Mr. Wood's home, police were coming out of the home. An ambulance was in the driveway. Mr. Wood's oldest daughter stood outside crying as an investigator spoke with her. The girls saw yellow tape strung across the fence and doorway of the home. A body was wheeled out in a body bag. Carrie began to get scared. Her friends screamed, then ran home, leaving Carrie behind. Some of the officers looked over at them, then continued with what they were doing. Carrie walked across the street, then sat on the sidewalk and watched the police. She wondered what happened to Mr. Woods. Did he die of a heart attack, or did he fall? She looked up at the house, then saw something in the window on the 3rd floor. It glowed in the window with a wild, wicked smile. Carrie stood up, clutching her little arms across her chest as the temperature outside was getting colder. She looked harder at the orange thing staring right back at her. Her eyes widened in fright after she made out what it was. The jack-o'-lantern smiled at her. Carrie backed into a rose bush, shaking with fright. Then she screamed, then ran home. As Carrie reached her home, she looked behind herself. She saw she was being followed. The jack-o'-lantern sat on the sidewalk with a big smile on it, facing her. Carrie picked up a rock, then threw it at it. As the rock hit it, the jack-o'-lantern got bigger. Carrie rushed inside her home. She locked the front door and called for her mother. Soon, the front door shook as 3 hard knocks were heard. Carrie backed into the couch in the living room, shaking in complete fear. She looked over at the window by the door. She screamed. The jack-o'-lantern's head is floating outside the window facing her. It grinned, and then it laughed again. Carrie ran upstairs as her mother came down. Her mother stopped her, then asked her what was wrong. Carrie then told her mother about the ghostly jack-o'-lantern. Her mother felt bad. She thought maybe some kids were playing a cruel prank on her daughter. So she checked outside looking for the jack-o'-lantern, but found nothing. When she came back in, she lied to her daughter and said some kids ran off carrying a giant pumpkin. She didn't want her daughter to be scared on Halloween because of some prankers. The mother promised Carrie she was safe and that it was all just a prank some kids cooked up. Carrie sat on the top steps of the staircase crying. She believed her mother and began to calm down. Carrie called her friends, but when she called the first one, Nikki, she got a haunting surprise. On the other end of the phone line, she heard an evil whispering voice.
Trick or treat.
Carrie's heart started to race as she moved the phone away from her ear. Then she put her ear to the phone to listen to make sure she heard what she heard.
I said trick or treat.
Carrie hung up the phone, then screamed for her mother. Carrie decided not to go trick-or-treating. She wanted to stay in and watch cartoons, do things to take her mind off the madness. Her mother sat with her and they both enjoyed Halloween cookies.
Your father will be home soon. I'll have to get dinner ready.
Carrie's mother said as she jogged into the kitchen. Carrie went to the phone. She was worried about her friends. She called the other friend, hoping to hear her voice. The phone picked up, then Carrie heard the same whispery voice as last time.
Trick or treat.
Carrie hung up the phone, then started to think she was going crazy. She thought there is no way a jack-o'-lantern can move on its own, or even talk. And how could it get to her friend's home so fast? Not unless they were all up to no good trying to scare her. Carrie started to calm down. Then she knew what she had to do. She needed to find out what happened to Mr. Woods. Carrie snuck out the house and ran down the street to Mr. Woods' home. The night was busy with trick-or-treaters and parents and teenagers. Even some people took their dogs for walks. Carrie thought if she could find out what happened to Mr. Woods, she would have peace of mind and probably go trick-or-treating without being so scared. Mr. Woods' daughter was getting into her pickup truck when Carrie stopped her at his house. Carrie asked what happened to Mr. Woods. His daughter started to cry and told her not to ask about it. She then got in her pickup truck and drove off. Awesome little pumpkin dress wearer. You know you were speaking to a victim of a murderous crime. Carrie turned around to find two boys dressed up as vampires. Both looked to be around the ages of 14 or 15. One had spiked hair and the other with long dark hair. I'm Daniel, said the one with spiky hair. The other one nodded at Carrie. And this here is my bro Corey. Carrie smiled and walked away from them. Daniel ran over to Carrie. He then said something that made her stop in her tracks. Whoa, wait up. I found the body. Carrie glanced at him, thinking he was making it up. I totally did. I was riding my bike then. I saw the old man's window up. So I was like, cool. Maybe I should look inside and see if everything was cool. You know. Carrie shook her head, hoping that he would hurry up and get to the point. No, that's not it, Corey interrupted. We were going to see what we could steal because the window was open. Dude, like, hey neighborhood, feel free to hop inside and take things. Dude, shut up. You don't know this kid. You're gonna get us busted, Daniel said as he shoulder bumped Corey. Daniel continued. I peeked inside and saw blood. Then I crawled in halfway and saw Mr. Woods. Carrie's eyes widened. I think a wild dog got to him. It was totally gruesome. Like some zombie shit, you know?
Are you sure you saw that?
Carrie asked, and she started to get scared once again. Yeah, little pumpkin girl. I'm like totally untraumatized. Good thing video games have so much violence. I would have been pretty messed up if I was new to the gore. You get me, little pumpkin girl? Corey, we gotta go. The two boys took off running as three of their friends came by throwing eggs at them. Carrie ran away as an all-out egg war broke out. Got you, lamers. Carrie walked home quickly. She felt eyes on her. She kept hearing whispers. It got colder outside, and she noticed everything seemed to give off an eerie feel. Two neighbors stepped outside, then stared at her. They waved at Carrie with big smiles. Both of their eyes seemed to be wide with a surprised look. A girl in a black coat with a hoodie on watched Carrie walk by. She stood with her hands in her pockets, and only darkness filled the inside of the hood. A black cat ran across the street, then leaped up on a fence. It hissed at Carrie, and it seemed to want to hurt her. man in a green Dodge truck drove by with clown makeup on. He looked at Carrie with murderous eyes and a smug look. Carrie turned away quickly, trying to not pay him no mind. A group of trick-or-treaters walked down the sidewalk her way. All the kids were quiet and had no smiles. Carrie passed them, feeling creeped out. She glanced back and found that all 12 of them had stopped and stared at her. None of them laughed or smiled. Carrie ran home quickly after seeing an adult standing across the street in a white bedsheet dressed as a ghost. The person followed Carrie with his eyes. Carrie finally made it back home. She looked up at her patio. On the staircase sat the jack-o'-lantern. She grabbed a stick from off the ground and made her way over to it. She walked up the steps with her eyes locked on it for any sudden moves. The jack-o'-lantern never moved. As she approached it, Carrie made it to the door, then rushed inside. She locked the door and held the stick tight in her hands. Then all of a sudden, there was a knock at the door. Carrie's mother yelled out from the kitchen for Carrie to pass out some candy from a bowl next to the door for the trick-or-treaters. Carrie stared at the door in horror. She thought maybe it was just a kid on the other side. Then the doorbell rang. A jack-o'-lantern can't knock on the door, Carrie thought. Carrie opened the door, and to her surprise, the giant jack-o'-lantern faced her front door. Its mouth opened, revealing sharp teeth with fire inside. Carrie screamed as vines came from the jack-o'-lantern, then wrapped around her arms and legs. It then tossed her in its mouth. Carrie's mother walked into the hallway leading to the front door.
Carrie.
She opened the door and found the well-carved jack-o'-lantern on her patio. She looked around and smirked, thinking it was kids probably still messing with Carrie. She picked it up and placed it beside the front door of the house. When she went back inside, she found a button from Carrie's dress on the floor near the candy bowl. One of her pumpkin buttons, it had a spot of blood on it. She then heard knocking on the front door. An ominous voice was heard. A girl had just finished nursing school and started working in a new hospital. Although she loved her job as a nurse, she found it difficult to get along with the people she worked with. They were mostly young doctors who had just finished medical school. The problem was, they were delighted in pulling pranks on each other. She found it very difficult to live with them in the residence next to the hospital because they stayed up late at night and made too much noise. The nurse worked very long hours and needed all the sleep she could get. Whenever she complained about their behavior, the mischievous doctors just laughed in her face and told her to shut her fat mouth. The nurse eventually had to report the young doctors to the hospital manager, and they got in all sorts of trouble. The doctors began to really hate the nurse and began spending days devising a plan to get revenge on her. Finally, one of the doctors came up with a very sick prank they could play on the nurse, and had the others gratefully agree to help. That night, they broke into the mortuary in the hospital and sawed off an arm of a corpse. Then they sneaked into the nurse's bedroom and put the severed arm under her bedclothes. They placed it at the bottom of the bed so that when she lay down, her feet would touch it. Chuckling to themselves, they stood around in the hallway waiting for the young nurse to go to bed. As the girl went into her bedroom, the doctors had to stop themselves from laughing out loud. The nurse was suspicious of their behavior, but she was too tired to care and went into her bedroom, closing the door behind her. The men waited impatiently in the hallway for the nurse to find the severed arm in her bed. But nothing happened. There was no screams, no angry yells, only silence. After a while, the doctors got fed up of waiting and decided to turn in for the night. They assumed that they had placed the severed arm too far down in the bed, and the nurse must not have felt it. The next morning when they awoke, the doctors went to check on the nurse, receiving no answers when they knocked on her door. They turned the handle and went inside. The room seemed to be completely empty. The doctors searched the nurse's bedroom, And when they opened the closet door, they were greeted with a horrible sight. The nurse was curled up in the corner of the closet. Her hair had turned completely white. Her eyes were rolled back in her head, and she had gone totally insane. Her face looked like it had aged 20 years, and worst of all, she was chewing on the severed arm. On Halloween in 2009, two boys wanted to play a prank on the people in their neighborhood. There was a small road that ran right next to the cemetery. They decided to climb two trees that stood opposite of each other. Then they both held either end of a fishing line and stretched it across the path. When someone came walking down the path, the boys pulled the fishing line tight, and it would knock off any hat of anyone passing by. Their first victim came down the path, and they pulled the fishing line. The man's hat was knocked off, and he ran away terrified. Pleased that their prank had worked, they decided to do it again. They saw a tall black shadow approaching as they lay in wait. The kids got ready, and when the shadow passed, they pulled on the fishing line with all they had.
Here we go!
Then they heard a ripping noise and saw a severed head rolling along the ground. There was this young boy who was allergic to sour candy. The last time he had a sour piece of candy, his tongue throbbed in his mouth and grew large bumps. It took him 2.5 months to heal. After the incident, the parents got rid of all the candy and gave it out to trick-or-treaters since it was Halloween. The doctor told them that if their son was to eat another sour candy, he could be placed in intensive care. The parents told their two older sons about why they couldn't have sour candy in the house, and they banned their sons for bringing the candy inside. The parents searched the boy's bedroom for the sour candies and found only a few of them and got rid of it. But little did they know, the two older brothers became upset and angry with their little brother over the ban of sour sweets. The two boys decided to get back at their little brother. When night came, the brothers were looking to pull a prank on their little brother. One of the brothers found 3 warheads in his dresser and pocketed them quickly. The other brother smiled at him as they both came to the same thought of what to do next. He snatched it out of his brother's pocket, then ran upstairs to their younger brother's bedroom. Both boys ran into the room laughing and shoving one another. The little brother got up from playing with his fire trucks, then asked them what was wrong.
What's wrong?
The brothers offered their little brother the warhead and told him it was the greatest candy in the world. Already unwrapped and shiny, the candy was dropped in the palm of their little brother's hand. He tossed it in his mouth and mumbled thank you to his brothers. The brothers snickered and elbowed each other. All of a sudden, the younger brother started to sweat. His hands shook, and then his eyes rolled up in his head. Then he had a seizure. One of the brothers caught him just as he lost his footing. The little boy trembled in his arms. The other brother reached into his mouth and was horrified to see blood spewing out all over the small child's mouth and down his chin and neck. The brothers felt extremely bad as they watched in horror.
Oh my God.
The brothers ran out of the room to tell their parents. The little brother was taken to a hospital, but 2 days later, the boy died from an infection that spread after his allergic reaction. The family was devastated. The parents were called in to see their son's body. The doctor told the parents of how their son died from eating that sort of candy. He pulled back the white sheet covering the corpse of their beloved son. The mother held her husband's hand tightly and cried. The doctor opened the boy's mouth. The parents both screamed in horror of the sight. The inside of the boy's mouth was disfigured and his tongue was ripped into 3 pieces. Other parts were peeled back and discolored. Large bumps and lumps filled the insides. The kid had very serious mouth injuries, and he had choked to death on his own blood and swollen throat, which pretty much explained how he died from eating a single piece of an extremely sour warhead. The doctor kept the candy so that he could run tests to see if something was wrong with it. He believed it may have been tampered with because the boy shouldn't have had such a reaction from a piece of candy. The two brothers were confused on why their little brother had such a serious problem with sour candy. They didn't understand why a piece of sour candy would injure his mouth so badly to take his life. At night, the father went downstairs to get a drink of water. He spotted a wrapper of a green apple sour candy on the kitchen table. He picked up the wrapper and was about to throw it away. But then he read the letters on the wrapper that were in small misshapen print. It read, "Sour Apple Warhead. This is the most sour warhead candy yet." On the other side of the wrapper in small print it read, "If you dare to eat this, you might need to rush to an emergency room. Made just for your kids from your local serial killer." The father gasped as he understood fully. His kid was not only allergic to sour candy, he was poisoned by someone. He realized he should have checked all the candy his boys brought in from Halloween night. He rushed upstairs to check on his sons. He opened their door in a panic. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, shocked to find his two sons eating candy. Both boys started to sweat.
Dad, I don't feel so good.